The Process Enneagram is a universal map for transformation. It outlines many different kinds of processes and change, and the one we're focused on today is the process of healing. But it's complex, and so for the purposes of this brief introduction, my aim is to keep things as simple as possible so you can easily apply the model to your healing journey today. So in this video, I'll talk about what is the Process Enneagram and how it's different from the Enneagram of Personality, what the Enneagram of Healing is and how it can help you, and I'll outline the steps of the Enneagram of Healing and provide some practical examples. But first, I'm Samantha Mackay, chronic illness mentor, Enneagram practitioner, and healing coach at the Individuo Process. I unpack what it means to heal and grow in this modern world, especially with chronic illness, in a culture that in its own way promotes illness and dis-ease over sustainable healing and growth. So let's start with what is the Process Enneagram. One of the fundamental truths of the world we live in is that everything changes. And while it might appear on the surface that those changes are random and unconnected, there is a universal process they all follow, governed by a set of universal laws which apply to each of us. The Enneagram encapsulates these universal laws through the symbol itself, which is a combination of a circle, a triangle, a hexad, and the points at which these inner shapes meet the circle. On the opposite side of the same coin is the Enneagram of Personality. It describes 9 psychological ego structures that are inbuilt to help us navigate the psychological stresses of childhood. The Enneagram of Personality also describes how we can grow out of those patterns to mature into non-reactive adults and to live more conscious lives. Our personality patterns will definitely influence how we walk the path to healing and the obstacles we face, but they aren't a part of the Process Enneagram model per se, so we're going to leave that aside for now. So back to the Process Enneagram. As you might imagine, it's complex and detailed, and I have years of study ahead of me to truly understand it. But I recently discovered a book called The Enneagram of Healing by Irv Givot, which provides an amazing description of how we can use this model to navigate a healing or recovery journey. And I'm so impressed with how practical or relevant it is that I wanted to try and encapsulate the key points here and explain it in a way that's immediately applicable and accessible. Important side note, Irv Givot's book builds on the work of a number of earlier teachers, including George Gurdjieff, John Bennett, and Anthony George Edward Blake. A question I get asked a lot is this: does this only apply to physical illnesses? No, not at all. What I'm about to share can be applied to any imbalance, physical, emotional, mental, or spiritual. It applies to any time we need external support for the healing to take place. However, for now, I am going to focus on physical imbalances as they're just a bit easier to explain. One last thing, the Enneagram of Healing helps us identify where we're stuck or spinning on a healing journey. It identifies the decisions we need to make to move forward. And because all of us on a healing journey experience fits and starts or cycle between the same issues again and again, we get stuck at certain points and we don't know why. And all of us will restart the process many times until we ever get close to completing it. And through this frame, we don't see healing as curing, but rather a journey to wholeness. And I wanted to quote the book here. Givot says, the words healing and health are derived from the same root word for whole. To be made healthy is to be made whole. And this can only happen in a strict sense when I bring all of the parts of myself together, when I remember myself. And through this lens, as Givot says, the illness becomes the teacher. And from my 15 years on a healing journey and my 30 years living with various chronic illnesses and dis-ease, that really rings true for me. So what actually is the Enneagram of Healing? And I apologize to anyone who is remotely familiar with this symbol and the Process Enneagram, because in order to keep this simple, I'm skipping over a lot of the fundamental laws. So let's start by looking at the symbol. First, we have the circle, and the circle represents unity and wholeness. It also represents the present moment and the flow of time. And in the Enneagram of Healing, it represents the external path we walk. It's what happens in the external world. Then we add the triangle, which represents change, and times when we're not fully in control of the process and where others need to help us in some way. And sometimes that other is the universe or a higher power. These are known as shock points. Next, we add the lines or the hexad, which represents the flow of transformation. In the Enneagram of Healing, these represent our inner journey, or what happens in our minds or our psyche, which means that in our inner world, as we look along those lines, we can have positive or negative visions of the future or the past, which changes how we walk the circle. And when our imaginations are powerful and enticing, they can lead us to shortcut the process, often slipping along the lines back to an earlier stage of the journey. Lastly, we have the points, where the lines intersect the circle and the spaces between the points are referred to as intervals. Each point represents a key decision or commitment that needs to be made in order to move forward, and the interval represents all the obstacles we must face in order to make that decision. Quick note about time. You might be wondering, how long does it take to complete this journey, and how much time does each interval represent? As this is a universal process, you will exist on this path in many different ways or in different aspects of your life, and time unfolds differently for each one. Sometimes it'll be minutes, days, or months, and other times it's years or decades, and there is no guarantee we actually ever complete this process. Now, with all that preamble behind us, let's get into it. We'll start with the outer journey first, and then we'll come back and talk about the inner journey. Starting with the top of the symbol, point 9 is also point 0. And at point 0, we have an imbalance, but we don't know it. The journey between point 0 and point 1 is to become aware of the issue and recognize that we need external help in some way. Some of the obstacles we face here are denial, delusion, ignorance, busyness, and procrastination. And here's an example. I once stepped into a creek and had one foot covered in leech bites, like 10 or 12 of them. I thought it was fine. I was applying the disinfectant every day and keeping it clean. And I kept saying to myself, it's getting better. It's getting better. But after a week, if it's still looking a bit weird, I couldn't pretend anymore. I had to admit I needed help. At point 2, we make a decision about the kind of treatment we need or want. We assess the options and decide on the best course of action to return to health. Obstacles we face here are confusion, overwhelm, coercion, indecision, or not being able to find a suitable solution. Now, as an example, you might find yourself in hospital after an unexpected diagnosis. At this stage, you're still in shock, not having processed it all. But you're being asked to make important decisions about next steps and the treatment. But from this place, it's hard to make a wise, informed choice, which impacts your ability to make a decision that you're fully committed to. At point 3, we come to our first shock point. And this is where the world has to help us get treatment. And the world can either cooperate or not. It doesn't always help. For example, if you've had an accident and you're waiting for the ambulance to arrive, you have no control over whether it shows up or not. Or you might choose a specialist you want to work with, but they don't have any availability for the next 6 months. Here we need a mix of faith, hope, and trust that we'll get the treatment that we need. And obstacles here can be doubt, dread, and a lack of trust. Here's an example from my life. When I decided I wanted to work with a particular somatic experiencing therapist, I was disappointed to find myself on her waitlist. But knowing this process, I knew I needed to be patient and wait and trust. And I think I might have slipped back to point 2 because a few weeks later, I felt this strong commitment to get help. And I emailed her again, and she had availability that week. At point 4, we commence treatment. We meet the doctor or the therapist or the practitioner for the first time. And this can be a tricky moment because in order to move forward, we have to submit to the treatment and allow it to work. Now, that requires us to trust the practitioner and trust the process. And if we don't, we'll withdraw back to point 2 to review our treatment options. And when we trust the process, we also engage in it and we don't resist it. Now, depending on the kind of treatment it is, it can take a few sessions to decide whether you do trust it and you do want to engage in it. But there does need to be sort of an active decision to allow that to happen. Now, the interval between point 4 and point 5 is an important one. Here we have to wait and be patient for the treatment to work. For example, with a broken leg, we might have to wait the 6 weeks. With some medications, we might feel the effects immediately, or sometimes it might take days or months for the effects to kick in. In this space between 4 and 5, we wait. And it helps if you can relax into the void and allow it to happen. Like baking bread in the oven, we must trust that the oven is doing its job and not open the door while it's cooking. Here, it can be really helpful if we have a support system to trust our intuition and to persist. But it's also completely okay if we decide the treatment or the practitioner isn't a good fit for us. If that happens, we return to point 2, we recalibrate, and we try again. Now at point 5, we see the initial results of the treatment. We feel a little relief, less pain. Whatever it is, there is an observable improvement in some way. The obstacle to moving forward from here is our assumptions. Seeing this initial success, we might reduce or stop treatment, assuming the problem can now get better on its own. Or we might injure or relapse if we assume the hard part of the healing is done and return to life as it was. These assumptions can send us tumbling back to point one. To move forward, we need to acknowledge that this is the start of the healing process, that we've been shown what's possible, and now we need to experiment with different kinds of treatments, maintain a focus on healing, attend to any contributing emotional pain, and change any habits that contribute to the imbalance. Point 6 is our next shock point, and here the world needs to support our healing. That can be being taken care of by family and friends, making the house or the bathroom more accessible for your needs, or returning to work with reduced hours or other modifications. For example, when I returned to work after my hip injury, I couldn't really sit, stand, or walk without pain. My chair at work really wasn't helping, so I asked for a weird ergonomic chair that would make it easier for me to sit at my desk. And while I felt really guilty about it, work was more than happy to provide, and it made my life so much easier. At point 7, we're symptom-free, but our health isn't stable. We can function without pain, but we lack the vital reserves of energy and can't yet withstand the impact of any major stresses. Underneath the surface, at a cellular level, we still need support. So the challenge here is maintaining healthy habits such as eating well, exercise, and sleeping when it no longer appears like we need them. If we return to our old life too soon, work too hard, too fast, or engage in any other emotionally draining activities, it's easy to slide to point 1 or point 5. To move to point 8, we need will, we need discipline and practice. We have to decide to live a different kind of life, to strengthen our body and permanently change undermining habits. At point 8, we have stable, robust health and can manage any stresses without slipping back. To move to point 9, we need love. We need to love the process of healing and all that it asks of us. And it is here that we can feel called to share what we've learned with others and can achieve a higher level of health. Now let me give you a quick example of what that process looks like from start to finish. Imagine you've fallen off your bike and you're pretty sure you've broken your leg and you'll need a cast. You call for an ambulance and they show up in about 30 minutes. In the emergency room, you meet a lovely nurse who talks you through the treatment and you feel confident the cast was applied correctly. They give you some crutches and send you home. You spend a few nights at home feeling sorry for yourself and you do some journaling, which helps. After a while, you notice your leg starts to feel better. You're in a rush to get back to work, but they suggest you take a few days to ensure you don't overdo it. Your partner helps you keep the cast dry while you shower. You've had to change your routine for getting to work, but you've been making sure to get enough rest. The cast comes off and things are feeling pretty good, but you're advised not to rush it and to see a physio to help strengthen both of your legs and bring them back into balance. You commit to doing the exercises and in a few months you're feeling stronger than ever, stronger than you were before. You maintain the exercise regime, you enjoy doing it, and tell others about your recovery journey. Even in that simple example, you can see how things are a lot less linear on the left-hand side of the process. Once we get through that initial phase of points 1 to 4, moving over to 5, it's really easy to sort of shift around a lot between 5, 6, and 7 while we work on releasing unhelpful habits. Okay, now let's talk about the inner lines. Now I mentioned how you might move back along the lines a few times, but the lines also represent our imagination and how that influences the quality of our decisions. So for example, at point 1 or 2, we can look to point 4 and imagine the treatment. We might be worried it's too expensive or that we have to give up something we love or that it'll be uncomfortable. It's not all negative though. At point 2, we can look over to point 8 and imagine what robust health looks like. And if we can do that, it energizes our journey. At point 5, we can look up to point 7, either with optimism that we've got this and that being symptom-free is possible, or we can look with delusion, imagining things are better than what they are. So that's it. That is your very short introduction to the Enneagram of Healing. And there are a lot more layers here, but I hope this is enough that you could apply it today. And remember, this is just one version of the Process Enneagram. There are many others. But if this has tickled your fancy and you'd like to learn more, either pick up a copy of the book or get in touch and we can figure out which part of the Enneagram of Healing you're stuck in.